Hi folks, thanks for joining me once again at Photo Tutorials. I've just got a nice little discussion for tutorial and with one or two settings on how to change one or two things on your Adobe Photoshop software and sort of on your camera as well. Basically it's aimed at sort of inkjet printers for people who do their own printing at home. A lot of people struggle to print out exactly on paper what they see on screen. Two reasons is: one, they don't have the monitor calibrated properly, and two, they don't have the printer profile properly. Now I'm based in the UK, and I mean just two companies that I've dealt with in the past who are Permajet and PhotoSpeed. If you're using their inkjet systems, you know, the continuous ink flow systems, both of these companies will offer custom profiling, which is basically what you need to achieve accurate colours on your print. As opposed to what you're getting on your screen. So if you want to, if you like what you see on your screen and you want to try and copy that through onto inkjet print, then obviously you need to have a custom profile made for the particular paper type that you're using. And it's important that I mention that, because if you're using a gloss paper, then you'd have to have a custom profile made for that gloss paper. So the custom profile is sort of designed for the surface of that paper, so that profile will control the ink flow that's put onto the surface of that paper. Now if you go to use that profile on something like a heavyweight matte paper, it may absorb a little bit more ink onto that paper, which is what you don't want. Because the problem with heavyweight mattes is when there's too much ink absorbed onto the paper, you lose detail, especially in the shadow areas, and this is what custom profiling does. A lot of people think it's to do with colour matching. It is in a way, but one benefit that you get from colour profiling is you get better detail on your print as well. Now basically I just want to show you some settings. So if I go to File here, if I go to Edit, not File, go to Color Settings. Now I use a lot of ProLabs now. I don't do a lot of inkjet printing, so I use ProLabs. And if you look at this working space area here, you can see how it's defaulted sRGB. Now this is what you want to have your Adobe software set to, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Now your camera is a different kettle of fish. Now what you want to do is, if you look at this setting here, Adobe RGB 1998, these two settings, sRGB and Adobe 1998, will be your alternatives on your camera. Now basically the Adobe RGB has a wider colour gamut in its setting than it does on the sRGB. So if you've got your camera set up to Adobe RGB, what it'll do is it'll capture a wider range of colours than it will at sRGB. So what you want to do is you want the camera to capture in sRGB, okay? But you want your Adobe Photoshop to view in sRGB. So your digital camera set up to Adobe RGB, okay, to give you that wider colour gamut on your image capture. And that just enables the system to be able to catch every nuance of colour and gradation that it possibly can before it's downgraded to sRGB. Now when you're in Photoshop, keep it as sRGB. The reason why is because your printer can't really see a wider range of colour gamut beyond the sRGB colour setting anyway. But the reason why we're asking the camera to capture in Adobe RGB is so that we have that wider colour presence on the capture. So basically it tries to capture as much of that colour nuance and if you like detail, if you like, before it's downsized to sRGB. Now I'll just leave that at that, and I'll show you what you basically do when you get your printer profiled. If you go to this here, this is a test sheet, which is basically what you get when you do a custom profile. Now, if you contacted Permajet or Photospeed, who are based in the UK, and they'd gladly do it for overseas colleagues as well, basically they tell you to print off a test sheet which looks like this. And as you can see, it shows you all the different gradations in colour and all the nuances there. But I'm just going to show you what happens when we change the colour space. If we go to colour settings here, so we're in sRGB here. Now if you look at these colours on this left hand side, the red, green and blue channel, if you look at the gradation in colours here, you can see a slight shift in colours. Okay. Now if we change that to Adobe RGB, we kind of sort of get a little bit more colour shift towards the shadows. Okay. But we lose a little bit on the highlight there. If I just go back there and go to sRGB, that's Adobe RGB. You can see Adobe RGB is bringing out a little bit more colour gamut in those colours. Now your camera will replicate that when it's set to Adobe RGB. However, the difference in that colour change, your printer can't really see beyond that. So your printer only prints out with a colour gamut range of sRGB. So that's the reason for having your camera set to Adobe 1998 and your Photoshop set to sRGB. And ultimately the reason why I have mine set to sRGB is because, as I say, I use a lot of Pro Labs, and the Pro Labs only work in sRGB profile anyway. So basically that's your test sheet, what you would get printed off. Okay, so I'll close that. Now when you set your camera to Adobe RGB, there's a couple of changes that you need to make to Photoshop. Now obviously this is your Photoshop colour settings here, and as I said before, because we're going to capture from digital camera in Adobe RGB, we want to keep this the opposite in sRGB. So what we have to do is we have to change a couple of these settings here in the colour management policies. Now because we have your working platform, which is Photoshop, with a different colour profile, what we want to do is we want to click where it says profile mismatches, ask when opening. We tick that, and it'll say missing profile, ask when opening. You tick that. So make sure that these two boxes are checked. Okay, and you click OK. Now the reason for that is when you're capturing on your digital camera, you've got to realise that it's got a tag on it with Adobe RGB. So when you go to open it in Photoshop, once you've finished working on it in your raw conversion software, and then you go to open it in Photoshop, what will happen is Photoshop will recognise that it's got a mismatched profile. And even though you've captured it, that image, you've caught it in Adobe RGB, what we're going to do is we're going to convert it. So what it'll do is it'll give you an option to convert it to the working space, which is the working space of your software, which is Adobe Photoshop. So when that profile opens up, then you tell it that you want it to change to the working space, and basically what will happen is you'll convert all your images from Adobe 1998 into sRGB, ready for printing. Now it may sound a little bit curious, but just try it. And basically, if you're going to have your inkjet sort of as your main platform for printing, then you really do need to have it profiled properly. Get your custom profiles done at either Permajet or Photospeed. Photospeed I can highly recommend, because they did an old Epson R2800 of mine a lot of years ago, and I had some Ilford high gloss paper profile onto that, and the results were absolutely spectacular. So basically that's the settings that you need. Give it a try, and I hope that you found it kind of useful, because sometimes it can be sort of, you know, you're pulling your hair out some of the times trying to get the your inkjet printers to see the colours differently compared to what you're seeing on your screen. So hopefully, just having those simple little settings in your camera and on your Photoshop settings, and warning you of the mismatch profiles, and hopefully it should stand you in good stead. So I hope you found this quite useful, and I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.